Are you surprised with Microsoft's recent love affair with Linux? You shouldn't be. Google Project Zero says Debian and Ubuntu are putting their users at risk with their sluggish kernel patching. A Linux survival guide. I'm going to discuss 21 applications that let you move easily between Windows and Linux. Plus, next month you can pre-order System76's new open source Thelio computer. This month, there was an increase in the Steam Linux gaming market share, thanks in large part to Steam Play. These are 5 stories that I will be taking into account. And the first story on the docket tonight. Are you one of those people that is surprised by Microsoft's recent love affair with Linux and open source? You shouldn't be, because it was inevitable. So, a couple of weeks ago, this story was all over the internet. Linux now dominates Azure. So, the most popular operating system on Microsoft's Azure cloud today is, drumroll please, Linux. So this story is from ZDNet, written by Stephen J. Von Nichols. Reading a little bit from his article, he talks about 3 years ago, the CTO of Azure said 1 in 4 Azure instances are Linux. So 3 years ago, about 25% of all instances of Azure were Linux. Then in 2017, it was 40% of all Azure VMs were Linux. Now it's late 2018. Guess what? A little over 50% of all Azure VMs are Linux. That number does fluctuate, from week to week. Sometimes it's a little over 50%, sometimes it's a little under 50%, but that's the exact number is not the important thing. It's the trend, right? So for the past 3 years, it's been Linux, right, on Azure. 3 years ago, it was 25%. Last year, it was 40%. This year, a little over 50%. So Linux is trending up on Azure. What is trending down? Windows Server is trending down. And that's going to continue. Everybody expects that to continue. Microsoft really expects that to continue, which is why Microsoft embracing Linux and open source. Again, inevitable. So this article written from Tech Republic's author Matt Assay. As always, I'm going to link to all the articles in the show description. Microsoft's love affair was inevitable. So anyone who is surprised that the most popular operating system in Microsoft's Azure cloud is Linux hasn't been paying attention. Ever since Microsoft decided to believe its own hype about developers, this was a foregone conclusion. So Microsoft has been really hyping, developers. They want developers. They're all about helping developers. Guess what developers like? Developers prefer open source over proprietary. Developers prefer, as far as operating systems, usually they prefer working with Linux rather than Windows. So again, if you're going to talk about developers, you kind of have to embrace Linux and open source. You just have to. So Microsoft's always had a thing for developers. Reading a little bit further in the article, in the past, however, Microsoft could thrive while constraining developers' choices. Indeed, Microsoft got in trouble with US and European regulators by offering a fixed menu of Microsoft-powered choices on the consumer side of business. So Microsoft, of course, was very closed off in the enterprise market. You basically had your Microsoft options as far as software and services and nothing else. You were limited to the Microsoft menu of products, basically. You want a SQL server, you'll run it on Windows, and so on. The article mentioned, rather than, of course, on a LAMP stack, Linux, Apache, MySQL. This has changed in recent years. You really can't do this in the 2000s, certainly not in the last decade. Everything from Kubernetes to Kafka. As far as software infrastructure, the best software infrastructure today is all open source software. So if you want to reach developers, you have to speak their language, Matt Assay says in the article. And what is developers' language? Open source. That language is all about open source software. So the other thing is Amazon's AWS services, very cloud-centric, and, Amazon basically has presented this everything sort of store mentality to enterprise infrastructure. Microsoft's trying to compete with that. Microsoft's trying to compete in the cloud market with companies like Canonical, which is making big inroads as far as cloud market share. So Microsoft really had a choice. It is, hey, we can either change as a company and start embracing this open source, cloud-centric movement going on, Or we can just keep doing the same thing we've always been doing. We can keep pushing Windows and Microsoft Office, even though they're both kind of dying platforms. But we can live off of those, at least for a couple of more decades, probably, until they die off. Of course, when they die off, probably Microsoft as a company also dies. Well, Microsoft does not want to die. Microsoft very much wants to live. So hence the major pivot, right? Now Microsoft with CEO Satya Nadella, they are really all in on open source. You know, they love Linux, they love Git. Of course, they love Git so much that they bought GitHub. GitHub, of course, is the largest Git repository on the internet. GitHub itself is not open source, but GitHub is the largest host of open source projects on the internet. Recently, Microsoft actually pushed MS-DOS to GitHub. So that is major news there. Microsoft open sources MS-DOS again. They've done this a couple of times in the last couple of years. So, and they did it again recently in the past few days. They went ahead and put MS-DOS source code up on GitHub. Now, you can't push anything to it. You can't make any commits to it. But the source code is there for anyone that wants to check out, you know, the source code for MS-DOS. So, again, Microsoft's Linux love affair, it was kind of inevitable. I mean, Microsoft really, they either had to evolve or they know they were going to die. I mean, right now, their company is worth something like $700 billion. They're a very large company, but the writing was on the wall. I mean, you can't keep living off of Windows and Microsoft Office. Windows is kind of a dying platform. You know, desktop computing is never going to be what it once was. I mean, there will always be desktop computers, but really, where does Microsoft see money being made in the future? Enterprise and cloud. So the pivot was necessary. And one thing I do want to mention is, you know, I have been very, very critical of Microsoft as a company. They deserve that criticism. Microsoft, as far as how they treated the free software movement and the open source software movement through the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, Microsoft really was the evil empire. I mean, they were the worst of the worst, especially under Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer. I think those guys have done more harm to really the world and humanity in general because of how opposed they were to free software and open source software. But I won't get into all of that. But Microsoft as a company, I got to admit, they have done some really positive things the last couple of years, really embracing Linux and open source. So I will start giving them the benefit of the doubt. I hope all of what they've been doing here lately is not, you know, just some aberration, that this is a fundamental change within the company. I want to believe that. I have to believe that because honestly, if those of us in the free software movement or the open source software movement can't believe that a company like Microsoft can change, or a company like Facebook or Apple, you know, some of these other companies, if they can never change. Well, if we really believe that, what's the point? Why are we even trying to spread the message of free software and open source software if we don't think companies like Microsoft can change? I have to believe they can change. So I'm going to try to be a little better as far as my treatment of Microsoft in the news than I have been in the past. I think they deserve, a little bit of credit here. And the second story on the docket tonight is the story about Google Project Zero, basically telling certain Linux distributions, namely Ubuntu and Debian, that they're leaving their users exposed to known kernel vulnerabilities for weeks. So this story, also from ZDNet, written by Liam Tung. Jan Han, the Google Project Zero researcher who discovered the Meltdown and Spectre CPU flaws, has a few words for maintainers of Ubuntu and Debian. Raise your game on merging kernel security fixes. You're leaving your users exposed for weeks. So, Horn earlier this week, he released an ugly exploit, quote, ugly exploit for Ubuntu 18.04, which takes about an hour to run before popping a root shell. Basically, what he's talking about here is, I'll post this article too from ThreatPost, another Linux kernel bug surfaces allowing root access. So a high severity cache invalidation bug in the Linux kernel has been uncovered, which could allow an attacker to gain root privileges on the targeted system. Of course, allowing anybody root privileges on your system is a bad thing. With root privileges, you can do anything you want to a computer, install, remove anything. You can destroy the computer if that's your wish. Anyway, So Jan Horn of the Google Project Zero team found this bug. He let the kernel team know about it. And when he let the kernel team know about it, Linus Torvalds and the kernel team fixed it in the upstream kernel the next day, within 1 day. Now, how amazing is that, right? So within 1 day, it's already patched, and within days, it's also fixed in the upstream stable kernel releases for 4.18, 4.14, 4.9, 4.4, and even all the way back to 3.16 kernels. So, very good job with the Linux kernel team really patching this in a hurry, but the problem was that some Linux distributions, they did not push out these patches in a timely manner, and they were leaving users exposed to potential attacks by essentially not reacting fast enough to this, not pushing these updates, through their package manager, and really patching everybody's system. Sometimes taking several days, sometimes taking a couple of weeks to do this. The ones that Jan Horn mentions from Google Project Zero, he mentions specifically Debian Stable and the Ubuntu LTS releases. So let's start with Debian Stable. Debian Stable, they ship kernels based on 4.9. This Debian Stable, which is Debian Stretch, is a rather old distro now. I mean, that's why Debian is stable, right? It's not a rolling release. Nothing ever gets updated. The only things that get updated really are security updates. So the kernel could get an update. You're shipping 4.9. Now you should ship a patched version of 4.9, especially now that there's this security flaw. But Debian took its time a little bit. Similarly, Ubuntu 16.04 ships a kernel that was last updated, August of 2018, yes. And Android is doing the same thing. Android, I did not know this, Android only ships security updates once a month. So if there's a new exploit and they just released a security update, they're going to wait another month before doing another security update. That leaves you Android users, I myself am an Android user, that leaves us vulnerable up to a month in some cases. That is a long time for these kernel vulnerabilities to be out there. Anyway, reading a little more from the article. Therefore, when a security critical fix is available in an upstream stable kernel, it can still take weeks before the fix is actually available to users, especially if the security impact is not announced publicly. Anyway, Fedora was a little quicker pushing their updates. It wasn't as quick probably as it should be, but Fedora got it out there pretty quick. Ubuntu kind of dragged their feet a little bit, so did Debian, and of course Android was very slow in responding to this. And the third story on the docket tonight is a Linux survival guide, 21 applications that will let you move easily between Linux and Windows. So we have this little slideshow here in this article of 21 applications that let you move easily between Linux and Windows. So the author here, he is assuming that you are a Windows user coming to Linux, and what will make the transition easier. Maybe you're going to dual boot for a while or use multiple machines, some Windows machines, some Linux machines. What are some applications that kind of make this a little easier of a transition for you? So the first application he mentions here is Spotify. Spotify, of course, is not free and open source software. It's proprietary. Spotify, of course, works on Windows. Spotify also works well on Linux. There are Linux clients for Spotify, so pretty smooth transition for you Spotify users. The next thing he is going to mention here is Yak Yak instead of Hangouts. Why are we using Yak Yak instead of Google Hangouts? Reading a little bit from the article, surprisingly, given how well Chrome runs on Linux, Google Hangouts is not supported on Linux. The author is mistaken here. Google Hangouts works perfectly fine on Linux. Works great under Chrome. I don't use Chrome. I really don't like using Hangouts, but occasionally people will ask me to join them on a Hangout, and I will do it, but it works fine in Google Chrome. It also works fine in the open source Chromium browser. It also works fine in Vivaldi. Vivaldi is based on the Chromium engine. So Google Hangouts is supported in Linux. It runs perfectly on Linux. There's no reason to use Yak Yak instead of Hangouts. I mean, I've never tried Yak Yak. It may be fine, but Hangouts works too. So in this case, the author, is a little confused here. GIMP Okay, GIMP instead of Photoshop. Let's be clear. If you're a design professional, there isn't really a substitute for Adobe's Creative Cloud. It's expensive, but worth it, yeah. I do agree GIMP is one of the best free and open source projects out there. But for professionals that have to use the Adobe suite of projects, GIMP may not be acceptable for them. But for just, for average users, say you want to just do a little photo editing, that sort of thing, or the things I do, creating thumbnails for YouTube or whatever, GIMP is fine. But for professionals, yeah, they're probably going to have to use the Adobe suite of software, especially if they're already used to it. So that may be a deal breaker for some. Let's see, the next thing he mentions, VirtualBox. So VirtualBox instead of Parallels. Parallels, of course, those familiar with the Mac platform. But he is right. VirtualBox, if you're looking for virtual machines, VirtualBox works Windows, Mac, Linux. It just works. It's been around forever. It's a very mature product. So anybody that's wanting to start using VMs, kind of new to VMs, VirtualBox is pretty easy to set up and play around with for the most part. So VirtualBox, I actually agree with him here. Fantastic product. The next thing he mentions is Inkscape. Inkscape instead of Adobe Illustrator. Again, that may be acceptable for some people, but again, for professionals, Inkscape is not going to be what they want, unfortunately. They're probably going to be stuck using the Adobe Illustrator on Windows or Mac. So LibreOffice, yes, LibreOffice is a great alternative to something like Office 365. Now, depending on people's work, some people work in an environment where everybody uses Microsoft Office. They're expected to use Microsoft Office. I can understand, depending on your job, you may be stuck in that Microsoft Office pipeline. But for most computer users, LibreOffice is a perfectly acceptable alternative to something like Microsoft Office. Let's see what else he's mentioning. Auto Text Expander for Chrome instead of Text Expander. I'm not exactly sure what this is. Why he mentions that, I'll just skip over that for now. We may not talk about all 21 of his applications here. Dropbox works on Linux, Mac, Windows, all the mobile platforms, Android, iOS. Dropbox is great. It lets you sync documents between pretty much any computer, any mobile device, any computer, desktop, laptop, servers even. So yeah, Dropbox, great. Tinkercad instead of 123D. So I don't know anything about CAD. I'm not sure if Tinkercad really is acceptable, especially for professionals. It may or may not be, but he mentions it. So those of you wondering about CAD programs on Linux might be something to check out. Cura 3D for 3D printing. Yeah, 3D printing seems to be fine on Linux as far as we have some good software for 3D printing on Linux. I don't own a 3D printer myself, so I've never played around with any of this stuff, but from people I've seen on the internet, yeah, 3D printing is great with Linux. Let's see, Slack, when it comes to team coordination, Slack has taken the business world by storm, so Slack is fine in Linux. So another easy transition there. Evernote has a web version, so because there's a web version, Evernote works on any operating system. It doesn't have a native Linux client, though. So that may or may not be a deal breaker for some people. Feedly's a web-based application, I guess, for RSS feeds, for those that are into that sort of thing. As far as RSS feed readers, there are a million of them, or some web-based, some just desktop clients, even good Linux clients. We have a lot of this in Linux, so if you're into RSS news feeds, you're good in Linux on this sort of thing. Google Keep is to Evernote like a post-it note to a 3. I don't know what Google Keep is. Skip over that one. But for those interested, Google Keep Pocket. Now, Pocket is interesting. If you want to keep articles to read later, the best way to do it is using Pocket. I actually have Pocket here in Firefox. If I right-click on something, I can pocket it, I think. No, I don't have it on this device. It must be a different browser I have Pocket installed on. Anyway, Pocket School. So the next application, Kindle Cloud Reader. I wonder how many people still use Kindles. I actually have an old Kindle ebook or ink reader, and I really love them. I don't have like one of the modern ones. I have like one of the old school Kindles. Love those things. Easy on your eyes. Great as far as reading. Todoist. I've never heard of this particular program, but I'm assuming it's a to-do list. Plenty of that sort of thing on Linux. So you guys that love to play around with to-do applications, we got all that covered. PHP Storm and Eclipse, pretty much any kind of developer-related stuff. I mean, Linux is the platform to be on rather than Windows anyway. Anyway, just some of the 21 applications that this particular author wanted to mention as far as, they let you move easily between Linux and Windows. So you guys that are, thinking about coming over to Linux from Windows, the transition is easier than it's ever been. You're not going to be missing out on much. The programs you are missing out on that, you were used to on Windows that aren't available on Linux, chances are we have some pretty good alternatives to those programs that you get comfortable with within a few days or a few weeks. And the fourth story on the docket tonight is System76. Their new open-sourced Thelio computer should be available in a few months. Who knows exactly when it's going to be available, but recently System76 announced to the world that open source hardware is coming and that pretty soon you should be able to go ahead and pre-order these devices. So if I go over to System76's website, usually they have a tab where they offer Linux laptops and Linux desktops. When you click on the desktop tab, and it takes you really to this Thelio website, the Journey to Thelio. And it is all about this story here, the Thelio story. They even have like this cartoon, this little skit here. If I click play, it's this like 1 minute animation with this cartoon character traveling through space. It's really cool. I won't play any of it, although it is under the Creative Commons. I probably could play it as long as I give them attribution in the show description, but I'm not going to do that. Anyway, Prologue Earth. With the salvaged remnant of a Rogue Series 6 bot strapped around his wrist. Tenzin, I guess Tenzin is the hero of the story here. Anyway, it mentions nothing about hardware here. It is just a really neat way, I guess, to market this thing, to hype it up with this little short animated cartoon. At the bottom of the page, of the Thelio page, you have the open desktop is coming, follow the journey. And you could enter your email here and subscribe. I guess that keeps you up to date on everything that's coming with Thelio. And maybe eventually you would be able to pre-order one of these Thelio open source devices. I don't know. According to Beta News, you can pre-order System76's Linux-powered open source Thelio computer starting next month. This was published about a week ago, so back in September. So sometime in October, System76 is planning on allowing people to go ahead and start pre-ordering the Thelio computer. This particular article mentions when you buy a System76 computer today, you aren't buying a machine manufactured by the company. Instead, the company works with other makers to obtain laptops, etc., etc. So they're not making their own hardware. System76, we kind of knew this. They're outsourcing, a lot of the equipment that they're building. So now they want to build, I guess, their own machine, and they want to build a proper, quote, open source computer. So System76 has announced that these devices, these open source computers, will be available to pre-order sometime in October. Now, keep in mind, this does not mean the desktop will be available in October. I seriously doubt it will be available in October. It may not even be sold anytime in 2018. It may be sometime next year before these devices actually start shipping, but you can go ahead and pre-order them sometime starting this month. The webpage, the Thelio webpage, again, doesn't tell me anything about the hardware. What exactly do they mean by open source hardware? Well, it gives us no information. This article from Beta News also, they have no information. System76 has told them nothing. The only thing we have about this article is about the cool little 1 minute cartoon from the Thelio website. So what does open source hardware mean? For example, all of the previous System76 desktops I've ever seen offered on their website had NVIDIA GPUs. That's the only thing they offered was NVIDIA GPUs. NVIDIA is not open source hardware. So are you going to go with some different graphics cards other than NVIDIA? You kind of have to if you want to be an open source computer, right? The same thing, what CPU are you going to use? What about firmware? Are you going to use some kind of open source BIOS? We need more details as far as what these computers are going to be, especially if you're calling them open source hardware, because I'm excited. I got to be honest, I would probably purchase one of these machines because we have made big inroads as far as open source software. I mean, we've changed hearts and minds as far as what the open source software movement has accomplished. But where we really fail is we've never really gotten out there with open hardware. Open hardware is what we really need to take the next step. And if a company like System76 can put out a proper open source computer, it would interest me. I would definitely purchase one, no matter the price. Even if it was, twice as much as me going and picking something off the shelf at Best Buy. If they develop a proper open source machine, I'd definitely get one. So it is a story I will be following closely over the coming weeks and coming months. And the fifth story on the docket tonight is last month in September, we saw an increase as far as Steam Linux gaming market share. Why did we see this increase in Linux gaming market share? Probably because of Steam Play and Proton. At least that is the assumption. Reading this article from Phoronix, Michael Larabelle, the owner and operator of Phoronix.com, he mentions there was an increase in the Steam Linux gaming market share over the last month, likely thanks to the late August announcement of Steam Play and the Wine-based Proton. So, the just published September 2018 Steam survey results puts Linux gaming market share at 0.71%. That is an increase of 0.12% compared to the month prior. So, still under 1% market share on Steam. But you know what? 0.71%, that was a 0.12% increase. So, that is pretty substantial, actually. That's a pretty good increase in Linux usage on Steam. But we still lag way behind as far as Windows as a gaming platform. Windows was down slightly, down 0.14%, but they still have 96.3% of the market share on Steam. So Windows, of course, is the gaming platform, 96.3%. Mac really doesn't have much, 2.92%. Of course, Linux under 1%. But we did see an uptick. This increase is, again, likely thanks to more Steam gamers trying out Linux because of the Steam Play announcement. When you have a big announcement like Steam Play and Proton, naturally, some people that normally wouldn't game on Linux are trying it out. So that is probably what sparked some of that. Also, this article over at VG247, some of the other results from the Steam survey that you might find interesting was Windows 10 is the most common operating system on Steam with 60.17% market share. Unsurprising, Windows 10, of course, being the dominant operating system. Windows 7, though, still has 30.01% of Steam market share. That is crazy that still nearly 1 in 3 people that are using Steam are running Windows 7 rather than Windows 10. That still just blows my mind that people are still running Windows 7. Again, a lot of people are on Windows 7 that, for whatever reason, they're never moving to Windows 10. So the Linux community, we really need to get our act together and try to get some of these people that are still on Windows 7, instead of hopping to 10, come over to the Linux side. Anyway, the various Linux and Mac operating systems make up less than 1%, unsurprisingly. As far as hardware results of the survey, the NVIDIA GTX 1060 is the most popular GPU, with 13.81% market share. I actually own an NVIDIA 1060. It's a great card. It's good bang for your buck, so it's not surprising that that's the most popular GPU. Followed closely by the GTX 1050 Ti at 9.37% market share. So tells you a little bit about the GPUs out there. Screen resolution. By far the most popular screen resolution to game on is 1080p. It is so far dominant that nothing else really comes close. The closest thing was 1440p, but that only had a meager 3.59% of the market share. 4K makes up a very tiny 1.32%, so not a lot of 4K gamers. Anyway, some interesting results from the Steam survey. And that was the fifth and final story on the docket tonight. So this was episode 11 of Taking Into Account. I release a new episode of Taking Into Account every Thursday. It is a weekly show. So sometime every Thursday I release Taking Into Account. And usually, other than the 5 main stories, I always read like a viewer comment or a question. And I'm going to do that this week. The viewer comment that I'm going to read is about me, and it is about me taking, a few days off from the channel recently. Last week, I published Taking Into Account episode 10 last Thursday, and then I announced that I was going to take a week off, and I wouldn't be really doing anything on the channel until, of course, this episode of Taking Into Account. So I was going to take a week off, which is unusual for me. I average about a video a day. I've been doing this channel for about 1 year. I'm coming up on 1 year actually next week, and I have made something like 330 videos on the channel, so nearly a video a day. So it is very unusual for me to go several days without making content, but I really needed a break. I was starting to feel pretty tired, not just from what I do on the channel, but although this is a lot of work, hundreds, thousands of hours have went into all this, but also what I do at my real jobs and everything else, life commitments. I just lack of time, it's like I really need a 25-hour day instead of a 24-hour day. So I took a little bit of a vacation, and one of the viewers here emailed me this comment here. Hi, Derek. I'm glad you are taking a break from DistroTube. Burnout can be a real problem, and for some time I've been concerned that you might suffer from it if you overextend yourself. Clearly, you're working to set the right balance, which is good. Your new Linux news episodes, normally on Thursdays, he's talking about Taking Into Account, they're a good service to the community, as are your moderate and reasonable commentaries. Going a little further into the email, besides the weekly news show, perhaps consider limiting your output to a maximum of 1 or 2 other videos per week. Maybe one that is a distro review, or one that covers a program, terminal tricks, etc. I generally don't watch the live stream, so I have nothing to say on them, other than the obvious that they suck up a lot of your time. And I didn't mention his name because I didn't mention I would put this on the show. All right, well, a couple of things here. So burnout can be a real problem. Absolutely. Burnout is a very, very real problem, especially on YouTube. It is a very real issue. Matter of fact, it's an issue I probably should cover on a video sometime, because there's been a lot of studies done about burnout among content creators on YouTube. Some of the big time content creators even have some serious health issues, mental problems, substance abuse problems, due to the fact of how stressful and how much work running a YouTube channel can be, how it can really pretty much dominate your life in some ways. I haven't really got to the point where I'm burnout or anything. I really have. He mentions he's concerned that I might suffer from burnout and I'm overextending myself. I do know my limits. I took this week off because I knew, I was to the point where I was just tired, wore out, really couldn't do much of anything, couldn't think straight. It gets to the point where, I just needed, I got to step away for a little bit, guys. And the other thing, me stepping away for a few days, something I really haven't ever done, take a week off, I'm normally on here every day, is I wanted to see how things went if I took a break. Because ultimately, you got to test these things. Like, if I take a week off, will I see a drop in views, a drop in subscribers, a drop in ad revenue, exactly what happens when I take that week off. And what I've seen taking a week off is not much happens. Did see a drop in views because I'm not making new videos. So obviously, most views come on these new videos, the stuff you're just releasing. So there is a drop in views, but you know what? Subscribers, I was still getting something like 75 new subscribers every day this past week, which has been pretty normal for the channel. So all of that was good. Pretty much, I stepped away for a week. I come back, my channel's still here. Nothing changed. I do think a lot of YouTubers, especially the ones that suffer from burnout, have this mentality that they can't stop. If they have to keep making video after video right away. If you stop, you're going to lose all your momentum and everything is just going to come crashing down, right? And that's not the case. So I actually am glad I stepped away for a few days. And, again, no harm. I mean, everything's still here. He mentions, he doesn't like my live streams. As far as he doesn't watch the live streams, he may have a problem catching some of my live streams. And the live streams are not for everybody, too. But anyway, other than the obvious, they suck up a lot of your time, he mentions in the email. They really don't suck up a lot of my time. The live streams are actually the easiest content I make. Even though, I do a live stream for 2 hours, that seems like a lot of time. 2 hours, me making something like this half-hour taking into account episode seriously takes half a day. Because, I actually have to find the stories I want to talk about, read them, do a little research. I don't do a ton of taking notes and stuff. I'm not that kind of person. But even recording the video, I don't do it all in one take, multiple takes sometimes. Then I have to edit the video and render the video. Rendering the video, it's going to take me an hour and a half to render this thing in Kdenlive. I mean, these take a lot of time. Live streams really take up no time. If I want to do a 2-hour live stream, I sit down, I click start streaming. When it's over in 2 hours, I click stop streaming, and that's it. No editing, no nothing. It's already on YouTube. I can just get up and leave, and I'm done. Live streaming is actually the easiest thing for a content creator. It's the pre-recorded stuff that really sucks up most of my time. As far as limiting my output, I do need to find the right balance. Maybe have some kind of set schedule, set format, knowing that I'm only going to do, these 4 videos a week and they're going to happen exactly on these days. But you know what? That's not me. I'm not a scheduled kind of person. I just do whatever I want to do whenever I want to do on the channel. It's worked out so far, and I'm going to keep doing that, at least for now. But I do appreciate everybody's concern, because his email about being concerned about me suffering from burnout, overextending myself, was not the only one I got. I got messages on YouTube about it, got messages on Mastodon about it, not just because I took the week off. I've been getting some of these for several months now. I've been getting messages from people, hey man, you look tired in your videos, you need to take some time off, you need to, get more rest, etc. So I do appreciate everybody's concern, but really, I'm okay. And before I go, this show was made possible by Ansem, Carlos, David, Leor, and Rob. These guys are my highest tiered patrons. They are the producers of the show. Without them, this show would not be possible. The show was also brought to you by my supporters. You see these fine ladies and gentlemen, their names on the screen. They are the supporters of the channel. If you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting the channel. You will find me at DistroTube at Patreon. Peace, guys.